Hello there and welcome to Cansanity. Today I'm going to show you how to roast up pumpkins, pie pumpkins, so that you can have some nice roasted pumpkin puree to make pumpkin pie or to use in your baking. So let's get started. Okay, so I have 5 pie pumpkins here. I have my oven preheating to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and I have a large baking sheet that's lined with tin foil. Now, if you don't have a really large baking sheet like this, then you could just line 2 baking sheets with tin foil. And I like to use the rimmed baking sheets because they will then catch any of the juice. Now, generally when you roast the pumpkins, the liquid evaporates, so there's not too much. So you could probably get away with using just a flat baking sheet, but I like to use the rimmed. So now on my counter here I have some of my homegrown pumpkins here. These are Naked Bear. That's the variety that I like to grow because I like to get the hull-less pepitas, and so that I can use those for snacking and for using in my baking. And these pumpkins here I just picked up from on a drive out to the country one day. There's all kinds of people now out there selling pumpkins and squash. So take a drive, it's going to be beautiful this weekend, and pick up some pumpkins or squash. So I just wanted to do roast up a variety so that we can see what the inside, what the flesh looks like, and have a taste test and see if there's any difference between these pie pumpkins. So now to get started, all you have to do is start by cutting them in half. Now you can roast pie pumpkins flesh side up or skin side up. I like to do it skin side up, and that's just the way I do it. And so if you roast them so that the flesh side is up, then you're going to get a little bit more roasting, caramelization of the flesh of the pumpkin. So now I have a sharp knife here, and if you can take the peduncle off, oop, that one came off, then do that because it'll just be easier for you to cut it. And then just take your knife and just cut your pumpkin in half. Okay, so inside you can see that the pepitas are dark green and they're hull-less, so which is just great for saving and using for snack. I dry them and then I eat them just as a snack, or I throw them in my granola. So I'm just going to take those out and I'll save them. Now I'm not going to worry too much about how to dehydrate them right now, so I'm just going to take out all the stringy flesh and the seeds, and I'm just going to dump them in this bowl beside me. Now I'm going to, once this is roasted up, I'm going to puree the roasted pumpkin. And so if there's a little bit of the stringy stuff in there, it's not too, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. But you want to take out some of it because it has a different texture than the flesh. So I happen to have a Vitamix blender, and it is a fantastic blender. If you're on the fence about whether you think it's worth getting a blender like the Vitamix, honestly, there's no comparison to another blender in my opinion. I've had many blenders, I've worn out many, and the Vitamix is fantastic because it blends everything so nice and smooth. Okay, so there's a little bit of the stringy stuff in there. And so I like I said, I put my pumpkins so that they are skin side down. So I'm going to go ahead and cut up the rest of the pumpkins, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so my pumpkins have been halved, and I have 1/2 left over that I couldn't fit on my large baking tray. But I just wanted to show you, look at the nice flesh on the inside of this pumpkin. This is the pumpkin that I picked up on my drive the other day. And compared to the flesh on the Naked Bear. Now, I grow these somewhat organically in that I don't use fertilizers with my squash or my pumpkin. So, you know, that could be the reason why my pumpkins have a little less flesh on the inside, or the variety. So, but they're delicious. So that's why I like to grow them, and I like to grow that particular variety again because of the nice dark hull-less seeds. Now I'm gonna put this, I'm gonna cut this up and I'm gonna stick it in there. Generally I don't do that, I just use the halves, but I have this extra, so I want to get it in the oven at the same time. So now you can see how thick that is compared to my Naked Bear pumpkin. So these ones might be done first, and so we'll just see how long it takes. I generally set my timer for 40 minutes and check it after that, and so I'll just cut this last bit out and then we'll put it into the oven. So I'm just going to cut this in half, this half into quarters. And then I think I'm going to have to cut it again. Oh, I can probably squeeze that in there like that. I'll just cut it like this. I'll just stick that in there. And there. So that's a really full tray. So now we'll pop those in the oven and we'll roast them for 40 minutes. Okay, so it's been 33 minutes, and I'm thinking because that Naked Bear is so small, I'm just gonna take a look and see, and take my pumpkins out. See, they're roasting up really nicely, and you can see that these are really smoked. So this is how you test to see if they're done. If you can insert that in easily, then that's pretty much done. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip these over. And I'm going to roast them for a little bit on that side, just to get some of the caramelization, get some color in that pumpkin. I'm going to test my pieces. Oh, those are looking good too. A little bit tough. Yeah, it's coming along. So I'm just going to stick that back in the oven for the remaining 6 minutes, and then I'll flip the other pieces. Okay, so it's been 40 minutes, and I'm just going to take these back out. Take a look at them. See, my Naked Bear pumpkins have darkened a little bit and dried out a bit. That's okay. And you know, it feels nice and soft on the one side, a little firm on this side. But I know I can puree them because I do have that Vitamix blender. And so that will be fine. If you want a softer, even more roasted pumpkin, then you can go for another 10 minutes. These are done too. Let's just take a look and see what they look like on that side. There's a little bit of firm, so I'm going to just flip these around. And it is done. I could puree it now, but I'm going to actually cook it for another 10 minutes just to. It's not going to harm it to cook it down a little bit more. And so I'm just going to cook it for another 10 minutes just to soften that the flesh up even more. Okay, so I've taken the pumpkin out of the oven. This all roasted for 50 minutes. I flipped these over and roasted a little bit on this side as well, just to give a little bit more color. And so now you can see that it's quite hot. So I'm just going to let that cool down before I scoop out the flesh. But you know, just so you can see, look how easy it is to just pull away some of the flesh. This is a little bit firmer. Just just a little drier. But you know, that's what you want. You want to be able to pull that right away. So now I'm just going to let that cool for about 15 minutes before I scoop out the flesh and put it into my blender. Okay, so my pumpkin's cooled down, so what I'm going to do is just going to scoop out the pumpkin and leave the skin behind. You see how beautiful that is. And then I'm just going to blend that up. And so I'm going to save a little bit of each pumpkin so that I can do a little taste test of the difference between the Naked Bear pie pumpkin that I grew and the pumpkin that I just picked up. And so once it's roasted, you can really scrape the skin, scrape down really closely to the skin and get all that beautiful pulp out of the pumpkin. Okay, so we'll have to blend the pumpkin up in batches. So I filled my Vitamix up with the pumpkin, and I'm using my plunger to make sure that I push the pumpkin down. And then now I'll just start it up and blend it up. So my first batch of pumpkin is blended, and so you want to blend it so that it's nice and smooth, and so that was accomplished. Let's take a look at that. And so now what I like to do is I line a large fine mesh strainer with cheesecloth, and it's lined, it comes off the bolt double, and then I've doubled it again, so there's 4 layers of cheesecloth which I've dampened. And so now what you want to do is you want to pour your puree over into your colander that's lined with cheesecloth, and then you want to let that sit for at least a half an hour. 45 minutes to an hour is fine too, because you'll be surprised at how much water comes out of pumpkin. And if you're using fresh puree, you want to do this. You don't want to you don't want to skip this step, because to get the consistency that you might be used to with pumpkin pie, which is a dense consistency, you need to strain off some of the water. So this is how I do it. So I'll just continue blending and putting my puree into my colander. Okay, so my puree has, I left it actually for an hour because I had to go do something, so that's fine. It's not going to harm it to leave it a little bit longer than 30 minutes. So, but you can see after you drain out the water, it's really thick. So I'm going to just move this over onto this measuring cup for a minute just to show you how much liquid I ended up getting that strains off. So that's almost 3 cups of water, and that's why I say it's important to do this step if you're making your pumpkin pie using fresh roasted pumpkin, because it's just going to take a lot longer for your pie to cook if all of that liquid is in your filling. So now, out of 5 pie pumpkins, I will end up with, I'm just going to fill up my measuring cups, and I'm going to see how much pumpkin puree I ended up with. Okay, so I ended up with 12 cups of pumpkin puree. And for my pumpkin pie recipe, I use 2 cups of pumpkin puree. And so if I use this puree to make just pie, that will mean I'll get 6 pies. So now if you pick up pumpkins at the farmer's market at this time of the year, you can get your pied pumpkins for as little as $1 a pumpkin. The average is about $2 a pumpkin. And so for 5 pumpkins to get 6 pies, that's $10 that I paid for my pumpkins if I was to buy them. To me, that's worth making my own puree. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple pumpkin pies because it's Thanksgiving weekend, and I'm going to measure out 2-cup measures, and I'm going to freeze that in bags so that I have it to use in the winter time. And I use my vacuum sealer to take out the air so that pumpkin puree will last for years in the freezer. Now I use mine up usually within a year, but the vacuum sealer really works well to take out the air and preserve your puree if you're going to freeze it. That's what I would recommend doing. Now, don't throw out your peels, and don't throw them in the garbage if you have a garden. Make sure that you toss your peels into your compost. And I have my seeds, pumpkin seeds here, soaking in water just so that it separates from the flesh. If you stick your hands in there and without soaking them in water, and you get all that pumpkin flesh on your hands, and if you let it dry, it really adheres to your skin. And so this just helps break that down and make it easier to work with the seeds. And so that's what I do. I soak it in water first before I take the seeds and roast them up or dry them for use in other recipes. And the water that you drained off from your pumpkin puree, if you're planning to make a soup, a vegetable soup, or any kind of soup, and you need some liquid, add that to your soup because there are some vitamins in there. So don't toss that. If you have a use for it, use it. And so I have my bowls of pumpkin here, where this one here is the pumpkin that was the pumpkin that I bought from on my drive. Delicious. And this is the pumpkin that I grew. Equally delicious, and I can't tell the difference between the two. So I find that pied pumpkins are nice and sweet, and honestly I could just eat this by the spoonful right out of the bowl. It's very different than buying the canned pumpkin from the grocery store. When you're making a pie using fresh pumpkin, you really don't need to add a ton of sugar. In fact, for my pumpkin pie recipe, which is at Cansanity.com, I only use ½ a cup of sugar, brown sugar, to 2 cups of puree for my pumpkin pie. If you're going to use store-bought pumpkin for pumpkin pie, you do need to add a little bit more sugar because it's more bitter. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Have a great day.